It was 3 in the morning when I found the image of the Virgin Mary glowing on my dresser. The same image I had thrown in the church dumpster just 2 days before with such disdain. My heart pounded, my hands trembled, and for the first time in 20 years of ministry, I didn't know what to say. How had it returned? How was it there, clean, untouched, as if it had never left? My name is Paul. I was 52 at the time, and for nearly 2 decades I served as a pastor of an evangelical church in rural Ohio. My whole life was dedicated to the Word, to preaching, to fighting against what I considered idolatry. And at that moment, facing that inexplicably returned image in my bedroom, I began to question everything I had preached. Let me tell you how it all began. My childhood was built on rigid pillars of faith. My father, also a pastor, raised me with firm fists and even harsher sermons. I grew up learning that saints were inventions, that Mary was merely a vessel used by God, nothing more. Paul, he'd say, banging on the kitchen table, you will preach the truth, not these Catholic superstitions that deceive the people. And I believed. More than that, I became a soldier in this cause. At 28, I took over the pulpit at the renewed Pentecostal Church of Hope Valley. It was a small but fervent community. My sermons were known for their intensity, for the way I combated what I called false doctrines. My specialty was exposing Marian idolatry, as I used to say. I preached with a passion that made people stand up, shout amen, and leave convinced they were in the presence of pure truth. For years, this was my routine. Married to Eleanor, a sweet woman who never questioned my sermons, we had 2 children, Michael, who is 25 today, and Sarah, 22. They grew up listening to my sermons, participating in services, living in an atmosphere where any devotion not exclusively directed to Jesus Christ was seen as sin. I clearly remember the day that changed everything. It was a Tuesday in March, one of those gray days typical of rural Ohio, when I decided to make a pastoral visit to Mrs. Conception, an 83-year-old woman who had attended our church for over 15 years. She was going through a difficult time. She had recently lost her husband, and as a good pastor, I felt it was my duty to be there. Mrs. Conception's house was on a dirt road, surrounded by a simple but well-kept garden. She greeted me with that gentle smile that only the elderly possess, offered me coffee and homemade cookies. We talked about her loss, about how faith sustains us in the most difficult moments, about God's promises to those who trust in Him. It was a normal pastoral conversation until I noticed something that made me shudder. There, on a small shelf in the living room, among family photographs and a few books, was a small image of the Virgin Mary. It wasn't large, maybe 6 inches tall, but it was there, on display, as if it were a natural part of that house. My blood boiled. How could a sheep from my flock have that in her home? How could I, who had preached against idolatry for 20 years, have failed to properly teach one of my faithful? Mrs. Conception, I said, trying to keep my voice calm, what is that over there? I pointed to the image. She followed my gaze and smiled with a simplicity that disconcerted me. Oh, Pastor Paul, it's the Virgin Mary. It belonged to my mother, who inherited it from her mother. It's been in the family for decades. I know you teach differently, but she gives me such great peace. Her voice choked up a little, especially now, after I lost my Joaquin. When I look at her, I feel like there's a mother there. You know? A mother who knows the pain of losing a child. I should have had compassion. I should have understood that this woman was grieving, seeking comfort wherever she could find it. But I didn't. Doctrine spoke louder than love. Rigidity spoke louder than understanding. Mrs. Conception, I said, getting up and walking to the shelf, this is idolatry. You know that. I picked up the image with both hands. It was heavier than I imagined, made of some material that felt like ceramic, with delicate hand-painted details. For a moment, a strange sensation passed through me, as if that small figure emanated something different. But I dismissed the thought immediately. Pastor, please. Mrs. Conception stood up, tears in her eyes. She doesn't hurt anyone. It's just a comfort for an old woman. There's no just when it comes to the Word of God, I replied with the harshness I had learned from my father. Mary was a vessel, nothing more. To pray to her, to venerate her, that's a sin, and I can't allow a sheep from my flock to continue in this error. I took the image with me, Mrs. Conception cried, pleaded, but I was convinced I was doing the right thing. I took it straight to the dumpster behind the church and threw it unceremoniously among leftover food and old paper. Let this be an example, I muttered to myself, wiping my hands on my pants. That night, I slept with the quiet conscience of duty accomplished. Eleanor asked me about the visit, and I proudly recounted how I had freed Mrs. Conception from idolatry. She just nodded, as she always did, but I noticed something different in her eyes, a sadness I couldn't understand at the time. It was around 2 in the morning when it all started. I woke to a metallic clang from the kitchen. I thought it might be the wind rattling a pan, or perhaps a cat that had gotten in through the window. But when I got up to check, I sensed something in the air that made me hesitate. A scent, light, delicate, like jasmine. It was odd because Eleanor didn't wear perfume, and the smell wasn't coming from any specific place. It seemed to float through the hallway. I walked barefoot across the cold floor of the house, following that inexplicable aroma. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the bathroom. With each step, a strange feeling grew within me, as if something were shifting in the air around me. It wasn't exactly fear, but a deep unease, as if I were about to discover something that would change everything. As I neared the bathroom, a chill ran down my spine. It wasn't the chill of an Ohio night. It was something different, something emanating from within the house, the walls, the very air itself. And then, without warning, the hallway light bulb exploded. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the silent house, and I was plunged into thick darkness. It was in that darkness that I felt it for the first time, a presence. It wasn't something I could see or touch, but it was there, as real as the floor beneath my feet. It was a dense feminine energy, and surprisingly, comforting. There was nothing threatening about it, despite the fear that was growing within me. "You don't know me," a whisper echoed behind me, "but I know your pain." I spun around, my heart pounding, but there was no one there. The voice was soft, motherly, imbued with an ancient sadness that somehow resonated within me. I tried to rationalize it. Fatigue, stress, maybe something I'd eaten for dinner. But deep down, I knew it was real. I went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep anymore. Eleanor slept peacefully beside me, oblivious to everything that had happened. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what I had experienced. The voice still echoed in my mind. "I know your pain." What pain? I was a man of God, a successful pastor. I had a family, a congregation that respected me. What pain could she know? In the following days, the manifestations intensified. Sounds of prayer in a language I didn't recognize echoed through the house during the early morning hours. It wasn't Latin, it wasn't Hebrew or Greek, languages I knew from biblical studies. It was something older, deeper, as if it came from a place beyond human words. The kitchen faucet started running on its own at 3 a.m. every morning. I would wake up, check it, turn off the tap, but the next morning, I would find the sink full again. Eleanor started to notice that something was different about me, but I didn't know how to explain it. How could a pastor admit he was experiencing phenomena he couldn't understand or control? The family portraits, which had always hung firmly on the living room wall, began to fall for no apparent reason. There was no wind, no tremors, but in the morning, I would find them on the floor, the glass intact, as if they had been carefully placed there. It was as if the house itself was trying to tell me something. And then, on Thursday morning, I found the image. It was there, on my dresser, in the same place where my Bible always sat for my morning studies. The same image I had thrown in the trash 3 days before, clean, untouched, as if it had never left. My blood ran cold. How was that possible? No one had access to the church dumpster, which was in a locked area. No one knew I had taken the image from Mrs. Conception, and even if they did, how could it be there, in that state? I picked it up with trembling hands. It was exactly the same, down to the small hand-painted details I had noticed in Mrs. Conception's house. But there was something different about it now, a kind of subtle glow, almost imperceptible, as if it emanated its own light. At that moment, consumed by a mixture of rage and despair, I decided to pray. But it wasn't a humble prayer, or one asking for understanding. It was a prayer of war. As I had learned, I cried out in the blood of Jesus, demanded that any malevolent presence leave my home, shouted against what I believed to be a demonic manifestation. But every time I shouted, something strange happened inside me. It was as if each word of rebuke echoed back, not from outside, but from within my own heart. And the more I shouted, the deeper a profound sadness grew in my chest. And friends, if you're following this account and can feel the intensity of what I'm sharing, I invite you to subscribe to the channel right now. Turn on the notification bell, because there are many other stories like this that can touch your heart and maybe even transform your life, just as this one transformed mine. You won't want to miss the next testimonies we have prepared. That night, the dreams began. And what dreams? They weren't like normal dreams, fragmented and confusing. They were vivid, colorful, more real than reality itself. I dreamed of a young woman with dark, serene eyes, enveloped in a blue mantle that seemed made of sky. She didn't speak. She just watched me with an expression that mixed compassion and sadness. In the first dream, she was just there, standing before me, as if she were waiting for something. I tried to speak, to ask who she was, what she wanted, but my voice wouldn't come out. It was as if we were in a dimension where words weren't necessary, where communication happened directly from heart to heart. In the second dream, even more intense, she approached and touched my face. The touch was gentle, maternal, filled with a love I had never known. It was unconditional love, without judgment, without demands. As she touched me, tears streamed down my face, tears I didn't know I was shedding, until I woke up with my pillow soaked. But it was in the third dream that everything changed. The young woman in the blue robe approached, and with infinite gentleness, touched my chest, right over my heart. The moment she did so, a torrent of memories and emotions I had buried for decades exploded inside me. I saw myself at 17, still a teenager, in love with a girl from the neighboring town named Carmen. We were young, naive, and our love resulted in a pregnancy that shook the entire structure of our religious community. My father, furious, demanded that I take responsibility, but her family had other plans. They sent her away, to an aunt in another state, and I never saw her again. I never knew if the baby was born, if it was a boy or a girl, if it was well. For years, I tried not to think about it, convincing myself that it had been best for everyone. I married Eleanor, years later, had my children, built my pastoral life, but that pain, that unanswered question, was always there, buried under layers of religious activism and ministerial dedication. In the dream, when the young woman touched my chest, that pain emerged with devastating force, and then I understood. She knew the wound I carried, the loss I had never properly processed, and even more, she was there not to punish or condemn me, but to help me heal. I woke up from that dream, crying like I hadn't cried since childhood. Eleanor woke up startled, asked what was happening, but I couldn't speak. How to explain that I was being visited by a presence I had fought my whole life? How to admit that maybe I was wrong about so many things? During the following days, I struggled with myself. Part of me wanted to resist, to maintain the old convictions, to continue preaching against Marian idolatry, as I always had. But another part, a part that grew each day, began to question everything. I began to observe my congregation with different eyes. I saw the women especially, many of them mothers who had lost children, wives who suffered in silence, young women who carried pains they didn't know how to express, and I wondered, didn't they need a divine maternal figure to console them? Was my theological rigidity depriving them of legitimate comfort? One morning, 2 weeks after it all began, I made a decision that would change my life forever. I decided to go to the church dumpster and look for the exact spot where I had thrown away the image of Mrs. Conception. I needed to understand. I needed to find some logical explanation for everything that was happening. The dumpster was in a secluded area, behind the church grounds, surrounded by trees, and rarely visited by anyone. When I got there, what I saw left me speechless. In the exact spot where I had thrown the image, there was a small circle of white flower, lilies, roses, chrysanthemums, all fresh, as if they had been placed there the night before. In the center of the circle, there was a small depression in the earth, as if something had been there and then removed. I knelt down and touched the soil. It was warm, despite the cold morning, and it emanated the same jasmine scent I had felt that first night. It was there, in that unlikely place, among scraps and debris, that I had my great revelation. I began to understand that perhaps those manifestations were not a punishment or an attack, but an invitation to expand my understanding, to embrace a dimension of faith that I had rejected out of fear and ignorance. I remained there for hours, praying, crying, talking to that presence that I now knew was with me, and for the first time, it wasn't a prayer of war or demand. It was a prayer of humility, of openness, of asking for forgiveness. If you are truly here, I whispered to the wind, help me understand, help me be better than I have been. There was no audible answer, but a peace descended upon me like I had never experienced. It was as if decades of tension and rigidity were dissolving, leaving room for something new to grow. When I returned home, Eleanor noticed the change immediately. Paul, she said, touching my face, you seem different, lighter. And she was right. I felt as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulder. That night, the manifestations ceased. There were no more strange sounds. The water stopped running on its own. The portraits remained firm on the wall, but the silence that settled was not an empty silence. It was a silence filled with peace, acceptance, a new understanding. The image remained on my dresser. I didn't remove it. I didn't fight it anymore. I came to see it as a constant reminder that there are mysteries in faith that go beyond our limited understanding, and that divine love can manifest itself in ways that our theology cannot always explain. The impact of this experience on my pastoral life was immense. I did not abandon my faith in Jesus Christ, who remains the center of my spiritual life, but I began to preach with a gentleness I didn't have before, with an understanding that God is bigger than our definitions, and that His love can use any channel to reach hurting hearts. I returned to Mrs. Conception's house a week later. She received me with the same kindness as always, without resentment or bitterness for what I had done. We sat in the same room where it all began, and I apologized, not only for taking her image, but for not understanding her pain, for being harsh when I should have been compassionate. Pastor Paul, she said, tears in her eyes, you don't need to apologize. I understand you did what you believed was right, and maybe it had to happen this way for you to learn something new. I offered to buy her a new image, but she smiled and said she didn't need to. She came back to me too, she whispered, pointing to the shelf where now sat an identical image to the one I had taken. It appeared here the morning after you took it. I knew she would return. I left Mrs. Conception's house transformed, not only by the supernatural experience I had lived, but by the understanding that true faith doesn't lie in the rigidity of doctrines, but in the ability to love and embrace people where they are, with their pains, their needs, their particular ways of seeking the divine. My sermons changed drastically. I continued to preach the Word of God, but with a greater emphasis on love, compassion, and understanding. I stopped attacking other forms of faith, and began to focus on what unites us, not what separates us. Some people in the congregation found the change strange, others embraced it with joy. Eleanor told me later that she had prayed for years for me to become kinder, more understanding. I saw how your sermons hurt some people, she admitted, especially the women who had lost children. They needed comfort, not judgment. I also started a different kind of pastoral counseling. I began to help people wounded by traumatic religious experiences, men and women who had been hurt by overly rigid religious systems. It was work that fulfilled me in a way that combative preaching never had. One day, almost 6 months after it all began, I received a letter that would change my perspective even more. It was from Carmen, the girl I had loved in my adolescence. After decades, she had found me through a mutual friend. In the letter, she told me that she had given birth to our daughter, whose name was Maria. She had grown up, married, and had children of her own. Carmen said she always wanted to tell me, but never knew how to find me. And even more surprising, Maria had become a nurse and worked caring for orphan children in a Catholic institution. I can't explain the emotion I felt reading that letter. It was as if a circle that had been open for decades finally closed. The daughter I never knew was not only doing well, but dedicating her life to caring for other children who, like her, had faced hardships from an early age. We arranged a meeting. It was strange and exciting at the same time to meet Maria after so many years. She was a kind, caring woman, and had in her eyes the same serenity I had seen in my dreams of the young woman in the blue mantle. We talked for hours. She told me about her life, her work, her dreams. "Dad," she said in one of our conversations, "I grew up in a Catholic family, but I always knew there was something special about my origins. My adoptive mother taught me to pray to Our Lady, and I always felt that she protected me in a special way. It's as if she knew of a pain I carried, without fully understanding it." At that moment, many pieces fell into place. The maternal presence I had felt, the dreams with the serene young woman, the very way everything had unfolded. It was as if there was a deep connection between my supernatural experience and the reunion with my daughter. Today, 5 years after that first night when I woke up to the scent of jasmine, I am a completely different man. I continue to pastor, but my ministry is focused on reconciliation, healing, and welcome. I develop work together with other denominations, including Catholics, always seeking points of unity, not division. The image of the Virgin Mary remains on my dresser. I don't pray to her, but I see her as a symbol of maternal love, welcome, and compassion. And when people ask me about my change of stance, I always answer the same way. I wasn't visited by a spirit of vengeance or condemnation. I was visited by a mother. And no true mother turns her face away when her child offends her. She just waits, with infinite patience, for him to learn to love. My relationship with Maria, my daughter, has grown and strengthened. She visits me regularly, and I accompany her in some of her work with needy children. It's moving to see how she dedicates her life to caring for others, as if she were fulfilling a mission that comes from deep within her heart. Eleanor says, "Our marriage has never been stronger. You've become the man I always knew you could be," she told me recently. "Kinder, more understanding, closer to us." And she's right. The experience didn't just change my theology, it changed my heart. My children, Michael and Sarah, also noticed the difference. They told me they feel more comfortable talking to me now, that they are no longer afraid to disappoint me with doubts or questions. Our family dinners have become moments of open dialogue, not preaching. Recently, Mrs. Conception passed away peacefully at 86. At the wake, many people commented on how she had always been a woman of deep faith, who found comfort in prayer and never lost hope, even in the most difficult moments. Her image of the Virgin Mary was there, in the coffin, with her. During the funeral, I made sure to talk about how Mrs. Conception taught me a valuable lesson about faith and compassion. I told how she showed me that divine love can manifest itself in ways that our limited understanding cannot always encompass, and how her simplicity and humility helped me become a better pastor. Looking back, I see how that experience was necessary for my spiritual and human growth. I spent decades preaching about God's love, but it took a supernatural manifestation for me to truly understand what that means. It took being confronted with my own prejudices and limitations for me to expand my capacity to love and embrace. The image remains on my dresser, a constant reminder that there are mysteries in life that transcend our understanding, but that shouldn't frighten or close us off. On the contrary, it should make us more humble, more open, more willing to learn and grow. Many people seek me out today to hear my story, some skeptical, some curious, some searching for answers to their own inexplicable experiences, and to all of them, I say the same thing: no matter your religious denomination or personal beliefs, what matters is that you are open to love, compassion, and growth. I've learned that God is far greater than any of our theological definitions. He can use an image, a dream, a coincidence, a person, anything to teach us, transform us, and bring us closer to one another. The important thing is to have the humility to recognize when He's speaking to us, even if it's in a way we didn't expect. My journey of transformation continues. Every day I learn something new about love, about faith, about the importance of being a bridge between seemingly opposite worlds, and I know that maternal presence that visited me that night remains with me, not as an external force, but as a part of my own capacity to love and embrace. If there's one thing I'd like you to take away from this story, it's this: it's never too late to change, to grow, to become a better version of yourself. Sometimes, God needs to shake us up a bit, to awaken us to truths that were right before our eyes. And when that happens, the only thing we should do is have the courage to embrace the change and allow it to transform us completely. May this experience I've shared with you somehow touch your hearts and perhaps open new possibilities of love and understanding in your own lives, because in the end, that's what truly matters: our capacity to love, to forgive, to embrace, and to always grow.